Ethan Walker turned onto the gravel lane and hit the brakes so hard dust rolled past the hood of his truck. Where the eastern rows of his family orchard had stood for nearly 80 years, there was churned mud, torn roots, temporary fencing, and a bright vinyl sign that read, "Coming soon, Cedar Ridge Dog Park." A yellow excavator was still moving. Karen Whitmore, president of the Cedar Ridge HOA, stood beside 3 board members and told the contractor the trees had been dead for years. Then 4 state vehicles pulled in behind Ethan. A woman in a dark green field jacket stepped out, knelt beside a metal tag half buried in the mud, and looked up. "Who authorized the removal of registered trees?" Karen's practiced smile did not move. She had no idea that one question could turn a neighborhood dog park into a 7-figure liability. If you enjoy stories where patience, records, and the truth matter more than shouting, subscribe and stay with this one, because what looked like a fight over dead trees was about to become something far larger. 3 months earlier, the orchard looked exactly the way Karen wanted people to see it. January had stripped every branch bare. The ground was hard, the grass between the rows had gone straw-colored, and the oldest trunks stood gray against a pale winter sky. To someone driving past at 40 miles an hour, the place could look forgotten. To Ethan, it looked like home. His grandfather had planted the first 12 trees in 1948, when the property was still surrounded by cattle pasture and the road into Cedar Ridge was nothing more than a county track. His father, Daniel Walker, had expanded the orchard slowly, not by buying truckloads of commercial nursery trees, but by grafting scionwood onto hardy rootstock. Every addition had a story. A russet apple from an abandoned farm 2 counties north. A tart yellow variety brought by a retired schoolteacher whose parents had grown it during the Depression. A deep red fall apple that Daniel claimed tasted better after the first cold night of October. Daniel recorded all of it. He kept a green canvas ledger in the bottom drawer of his workbench. Each page carried dates, graph locations, bloom times, harvest notes, and hand-drawn row maps. Some entries were precise enough to read like lab notes. Others sounded like a father talking to himself. Row 4, tree 7. Weak bloom after late frost. Leave it alone. It knows what it's doing. Ethan had laughed the first time he read that line as a teenager. Years later, after Daniel died, it became one of the sentences he remembered most. The orchard had never been a serious source of income. Ethan sold a little fruit at a roadside stand in good years and let a local cider maker buy surplus crates in October. But the land's real value was not measured in bushels. It was the place where his father had taught him how to sharpen a pruning knife. It was where his mother had taken family photographs every spring. It was where Daniel, already moving slowly from age, had insisted on making one last round through the rows the autumn before he died. That final year, Daniel had done something Ethan barely understood at the time. He worked with the State Agricultural Heritage Office to register the oldest portion of the orchard in a conservation program for historic fruit varieties. The program was not a park designation, and it did not transfer ownership to the state. The land still belonged entirely to Ethan. But the registration documented 47 trees and several surviving genetic lines considered important to regional agricultural history. The state photograph tags, recorded graft maps, collected samples, and filed the preservation agreement with the property records. Daniel treated the process with the seriousness other men reserved for estate planning. "They don't have to be famous," he told Ethan. "They just have to survive." After his father's death, Ethan renewed the paperwork, maintained the tags, and kept copies of every inspection in a steel file box inside the house. He did not talk about the program much because there was no reason to. The orchard sat on his land. He paid the taxes. He maintained the fence. No one had challenged any of that for decades. Then Cedar Ridge expanded. A developer built 62 homes along the southern boundary, followed by a second phase across the county road. The Homeowners Association eventually controlled a clubhouse, a pool, 2 retention ponds, landscaped entrances, and several small common parcels. It did not control Ethan's property. His house and orchard predated the subdivision, and his deed was outside the HOA covenants. Karen Whitmore knew that. She also knew something else. Cedar Ridge had promised residents a new dog park before spring. Karen had made the promise at the annual meeting in October, standing beneath a projector screen with architectural renderings behind her. The proposed park had shade structures, a wash station, separate runs for large and small dogs, ornamental fencing, benches, lighting, and a paved walking loop. It looked expensive because it was expensive, and Karen presented it as proof that Cedar Ridge was becoming the kind of community where property values would rise because amenities kept improving. Residents applauded. The problem was land. The HOA owned 3 parcels large enough to consider, but each had complications. One sat beside a retention pond and would require drainage work. Another bordered 4 backyards whose owners threatened to fight the noise. The third was narrow, sloped, and expensive to grade. Then there was Ethan's orchard. On the HOA's planning map appeared as a large rectangular green space beside the newest phase. It was flat. It had road access. It already contained mature trees that could provide shade if some were left standing. Most importantly, Karen did not have to persuade 60 homeowners to accept a dog park beside their houses if she could persuade everyone that the orchard was an abandoned hazard waiting to be corrected. Her first letter arrived on January 9. It was addressed to Ethan Walker and headed Vegetation and Safety Concern. The letter described unmaintained woody growth along the Cedar Ridge boundary and requested that Ethan remove dead material within 30 days. Ethan read it twice, then walked outside and looked at the orchard. He had pruned it 6 weeks earlier. He emailed the HOA office that afternoon. He explained that the trees were dormant, not dead, attached a copy of his property survey, and reminded them that his land was not subject to Cedar Ridge covenants. 4 days later, Karen replied. The issue, she wrote, was no longer aesthetic maintenance. Residents had reported rodents and falling limbs. The HOA therefore had an obligation to address a community safety concern affecting adjacent homes. Ethan answered again. He asked for the complaints, photographs of the alleged fallen limbs, and any legal authority allowing an HOA to enter property outside its jurisdiction. Karen did not provide them. Instead, a second notice appeared. This one used stronger language: dead orchard, potential public hazard. Ethan drove to the HOA office and asked to speak with Karen directly. She met him in the lobby wearing a navy blazer, pearl earrings, and the calm expression of someone who had already decided what the conversation meant. The board has received multiple concerns, she said. Then show me the concerns. We're not required to expose residents to retaliation. I'm asking for the complaints you're using to justify entering my property. Karen folded her hands. No one is entering your property today. Today? Her eyes shifted for less than a second. Ethan noticed. She told him the board would review the matter at its next meeting. Ethan asked for the date. She gave him one. When he checked the posted schedule that evening, he discovered the meeting had been moved forward 2 days and was listed as a special emergency session. He arrived 20 minutes after it ended. The minutes were already drafted. The board had voted to classify the orchard as a potential hazard affecting Cedar Ridge property. Attached to the packet were 6 winter photographs showing bare branches against a gray sky. There were no summer photographs, no agricultural records, no inspection notes from Ethan, no mention that his property lay outside HOA covenants. But one page mattered more than the rest. At the top, in bold black letters, were the words Certifi Arborist Hazard Assessment. The report carried a professional license number, a signature, and a conclusion that most of the eastern orchard contained dead or structurally compromised trees requiring prompt removal. Ethan stopped reading and looked at the name beneath the signature. He did not recognize it. That night, he laid the report beside his father's green ledger at the kitchen table. The contrast was almost absurd. Daniel's notes tracked decades of living trees through frost, drought, insects, graft failures, recovery, and harvest. The HOA report dismissed most of them in 4 pages. Ethan began with the obvious questions. The report claimed the arborist had completed a site inspection on January 17. Ethan had been home that entire day. His driveway camera showed no visitor. The orchard gate had remained locked. There was no photograph of an individual tree trunk, no root zone assessment, no scratch test, no core sample, no coordinates, and no inventory identifying which specific trees were supposedly dangerous. There were only wide shots. Ethan searched the license number. It belonged to an arborist named Dr. Samuel Pierce, a respected consulting specialist based nearly 90 miles away. The name was real. The certification was real. That made the report look stronger, not weaker. But one detail felt wrong. The report's signature block listed a business address Pierce had left 2 years earlier. Ethan did not call Karen. He saved the original email. He downloaded the PDF twice, once to an external drive. He photographed the envelope in which the printed packet had arrived. He wrote down the date, time, and names of the board members who had voted. Then he opened his father's ledger. Daniel had marked several trees as late sleepers, his phrase for varieties that tended to break bud later than modern commercial apples. One had been listed as nearly bare through mid-March during a cold spring 16 years earlier, then produced a normal crop. The next morning, Ethan called an independent orchard specialist named Laura Bennett. Laura arrived with pruning shears, a hand lens, and none of the drama Karen had attached to the problem. She spent nearly 2 hours moving from tree to tree. She bent small twigs, checked buds, examined bark. scraped a thumbnail-sized patch from a branch on one of the trees the HOA report had called dead. Under the gray outer bark was a clean line of green living tissue. Laura looked at Ethan. This tree is dormant. They checked another, green, then another, green again. By the end of the inspection, Laura had found storm damage on 2 limbs and 1 declining tree that needed attention. She found no basis for declaring the eastern orchard dead. Ethan asked the question that changed the direction of everything. If Dr. Pierce inspected these trees, how did he miss that? Laura looked back at the report. I'd start by asking whether he inspected them at all. Ethan sent Karen a written notice the same afternoon. He attached Laura Bennett's preliminary findings, stated that the orchard was alive, disputed the HOA's hazard designation, and demanded that no employee, contractor, or agent of Cedar Ridge enter his land without permission. He copied the HOA's management company and every board member. At 8:14 the next morning, Karen replied with 3 sentences. The board had reviewed his objection. The emergency classification remained in effect. Further action would be taken as necessary to protect the community. Ethan forwarded everything to a local attorney, then began preparing a formal challenge. He expected letters, a hearing, maybe an argument over where HOA authority ended. He did not expect bulldozers. 2 mornings later, his neighbor Frank Delaney called at 7:06. Ethan, there are trucks in your orchard. Ethan was already reaching for his keys. What kind of trucks? Excavator, skid steer, dump truck. They took down part of your fence. By the time Ethan reached the county road, he could see the excavator boom above the trees. He turned into the lane and found the gate lying flat beside the ditch. Orange survey stakes formed a rough oval through the eastern rows. A temporary banner had been zip-tied to 2 posts near the road, Future Cedar Ridge Dog Park. Beyond it, a skid steer pushed brush into a pile. A tracked excavator had already pulled 3 trees from the ground. The sight stopped Ethan more effectively than any barricade could have. One of the uprooted trees lay on its side with a root ball almost 6 feet across. Mud clung to roots his father had watered by hand during a drought 20 years earlier. Another trunk had been cut into sections. Fresh wood showed pale against the dark bark. Karen stood beside a white contractor pickup holding a clipboard. Ethan walked toward her, phone recording. Stop the equipment. Karen raised one hand toward the operator but did not signal him to stop. You were notified. I notified you that you have no permission to be here. The board authorized emergency vegetation removal. This is my property. The affected area creates a safety condition for Cedar Ridge residents. Ethan turned the camera toward the excavator as its bucket settled around another root crown. I am telling you on video to stop work and leave my land. A broad-shouldered contractor in a reflective vest approached. His name, printed on his shirt, was Dale Mercer. We've got authorization, he said. From whom? Dale pointed at Karen. She doesn't own this land. Karen opened the clipboard and removed a document. Emergency vegetation removal authorization. Approved by the board and reviewed by council. Ethan held out his hand. She hesitated, then allowed him to photograph it. The document referred to community nuisance abatement and imminent structural vegetation risk. It cited a section of the Cedar Ridge rules. Ethan knew the section. It applied to common property and lots governed by the declaration. His orchard was neither. Where is the court order? He asked. Karen's mouth tightened. We don't require a court order to correct an emergency affecting our residents. Where is the county order? This is an HOA enforcement matter. On land outside your HOA? Dale looked from Karen to Ethan. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Karen spoke before he could. Our council cleared access. Continue. Ethan did not step in front of the equipment. He did not touch the operator. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he began documenting. He filmed the broken gate and fence line. He recorded the excavator's equipment number, the skid steer's company markings, the dump truck plate, and the names on the workers' shirts. He photographed each uprooted tree from several angles. He captured the orange stakes and the future dog park sign. He recorded Karen instructing Dale to continue after Ethan had expressly denied permission. Then he called the sheriff's non-emergency line and reported unauthorized entry and destruction of property. A deputy arrived 34 minutes later. Karen greeted him first. That mattered. By the time Ethan walked over, she had already framed the dispute as an HOA safety action involving a resistant adjacent landowner. She showed the deputy the hazard report, the board authorization, and a site map highlighted in yellow. The deputy studied the documents. Ethan handed him his deed map. My property is outside the association. Karen said, there is an easement. Show it. She produced a printed subdivision plan with a shaded strip along the edge of the orchard. Ethan recognized it immediately. That's a drainage easement. It is 12 feet wide. You are 60 yards inside my property. The deputy looked again. Dale stopped the excavator on his own. For several minutes, no one spoke while the deputy called dispatch and asked for a supervisor. The pause came too late for the 5 trees already on the ground. Ethan walked toward the nearest root ball. Something metallic caught the morning light beneath a layer of wet clay. He crouched and pulled gently. A small aluminum tag, bent but still attached by wire, came free from the mud. The stamped characters were dirty but legible. HO 4719. Ethan stared at it. He had seen the format before. Not in HOA records. In the state agricultural heritage file his father had kept in the steel box. He photographed the tag where it lay, then stopped himself from picking it up again. Karen walked closer. "What is that?" Ethan looked at her. "The reason nobody should move another tree." He called the number printed on the state preservation packet. The first person who answered transferred him twice. The third was a program coordinator named Miriam Holt. Ethan gave his name, property address, registration number, and the code from the metal tag. There was a short silence as she searched the system. "Mr. Walker, I have your orchard record. Is it active?" "Yes." "Was any release or removal authorization filed?" Another pause. "No." Ethan looked across the torn ground at Karen. "An HOA contractor is removing trees right now." Miriam's tone changed. "How many?" 5 are down. They were moving toward the east row. "Do not allow anyone to dispose of the root systems or tagged material if you can prevent it safely. Do not alter the site yourself. I'm escalating this." "What exactly is the registration protecting?" "The file identifies 47 heritage specimens and associated genetic lines under the State Agricultural Conservation Program. I need to review the property agreement before I say more, but there should have been notification before any authorized removal." "There was none. I understand." She asked for photographs. Ethan sent them while standing beside the ruined row. The deputy's supervisor arrived. After reviewing the deed and drainage easement, he told the contractor not to continue until ownership and authority were clarified. Karen objected that delay would expose the HOA to additional costs. The supervisor answered with the first sentence that visibly unsettled her. "Cost is not my concern. You don't get to use our presence to settle a civil dispute in your favor." The machines went silent. By noon, the orchard had become a documented scene rather than an active construction site. By 2, Miriam had called back. The state was sending an agricultural conservation investigator and a horticultural specialist the next morning. She repeated the instruction not to move the damaged trees. She asked Ethan for every HOA notice, every report, his photographs, any video of the work, and the historical orchard records. Ethan scanned his father's ledger 1 page at a time. When the state team arrived, they did not begin with Karen. They began with the trees. Miriam came in person, accompanied by Dr. Helen Shaw, a pomologist from the State University Extension Program, and investigator Marcus Bell from the Department of Agriculture's Compliance Unit. Helen examined the exposed roots before walking the surviving rows. She checked buds, bark, graft unions, and tagged trunks. She compared Daniel's hand-drawn map with the state's digital inventory. Marcus photographed everything. At the 5th uprooted tree, Helen sliced a thin piece of bark from an intact branch. Green tissue showed beneath it. "Alive at removal," she said. Marcus wrote the words into his notes. Karen, who had arrived with the HOA manager, tried to interrupt. The certified arborist determined those trees were dead. Marcus looked up. "Which certified arborist?" Karen named Samuel Pierce. "Did he inspect in person?" "That's what the report says." Marcus held out his hand. "Then I'll need the original report, the engagement letter, the inspection photographs, and proof of payment." Karen's confidence returned slightly. "Our management office can provide those." "Good." He turned back toward the root ball. Ethan expected him to ask about the property line next. Instead, Marcus asked something more dangerous. "Mr. Walker, where did the HOA get the report saying these trees were dead?" Ethan looked toward Karen. "That," he said, "is what I want to know." The original certified arborist hazard assessment reached the state office 3 days later. At least Karen called it the original. It was a 12-page PDF, longer than the version sent to Ethan. It carried Dr. Samuel Pierce's name, certification number, digital signature, and a letterhead for Pierce Urban Forestry Consulting. Marcus Bell did not assume it was fake. He verified it. That distinction became important. He called the certification board. Pierce's license was active. He confirmed Pierce's current office through public records. Then he contacted Pierce directly and sent him the report. Pierce called back within 20 minutes. "I did not write this." Marcus put him on a recorded statement. "Have you inspected the Walker Orchard?" "No." "Have you been retained by Cedar Ridge HOA?" "No." "Did you authorize anyone to use your signature?" "No." "Have you ever prepared a hazard assessment for that address?" "Never heard of the place until today." The state compared the digital signature on the HOA report with older documents Pierce had filed publicly for municipal tree projects. The shape was identical down to tiny compression artifacts. It had been copied. Pierce's letterhead was outdated because whoever built the document had apparently used a report from before his office relocation. Then came the file metadata. The PDF had been exported from software registered to Cedar Ridge Community Management. Its creation date was January 18 at 6:42 p.m., one day after the inspection it claimed Pierce had conducted. The author field contained the initials KW. Karen Whitmore told Marcus those initials proved nothing. Templates are shared in the office, she said during her interview. Someone could have used a prior document accidentally. Marcus did not argue. He asked who someone might be. Karen named an administrative assistant. The assistant denied creating the report and gave investigators access to her work calendar. She had been off that day. Karen suggested the management company might have generated it. The management company's regional director produced system logs showing the file had been created from a user account assigned to Karen for board business. Karen said accounts were sometimes left open. Each explanation closed one door and opened another. Then Marcus asked for the invoice. The HOA's accounts payable record showed a $4,850 charge for certified tree risk survey and emergency assessment. The payee was not Samuel Pierce or his company. It was Green Shield Community Consulting LLC. Pierce confirmed he had never heard of Green Shield. The invoice number matched an entry in the dog park construction budget. Marcus requested the contract behind it. There was none, only an approval email. The email had been sent by Karen to the HOA treasurer 2 days before the Bulldozers entered Ethan's property. Please release Green Shield payment today. We need the hazard document completed before the contractor mobilizes. Karen had written the sentence herself. For the first time, the case was no longer about whether she had misunderstood dormant apple trees. It was about whether someone had needed a document badly enough to create one. The state's next step was not dramatic. No one arrived with handcuffs. No television crew appeared at Karen's house. Instead, Helen Shaw returned to the orchard with 2 technicians, a surveyor, and a stack of old records. They built an inventory. Every registered tree was assigned a condition: uprooted, cut, root damaged, crown damaged, intact, missing tag, confirmed by map, confirmed by graft record, confirmed by prior photograph. Daniel Walker's green ledger became unexpectedly valuable. His hand-drawn rows were crude compared with the state's mapping software, but they contained details no modern survey could replace. Tree 11 had been grafted from a branch collected at the collapsed Brennan Farm in 1987. Tree 23 was a red-fleshed apple Daniel had maintained for 32 years. Tree 31 had failed once, been regrafted, and survived. The metal tags matched those histories. When the count was complete, 47 registered trees or associated heritage specimens fell within the protected inventory. 5 had been fully uprooted during the first morning. 9 more showed root zone damage from grading and equipment traffic. Several fence-side trees had suffered cuts or compaction. The rest were still standing. Karen's attorney immediately seized on that fact. Then the state is exaggerating, he told the board. Most of the orchard remains. Helen answered that argument in a written assessment. The value of the trees, she explained, was not comparable to replacing landscaping at a clubhouse. A $15 nursery apple tree could not substitute for a documented heritage specimen with a known genetic line, established root system, historical provenance, and conservation record. Restoration could require graft recovery, propagation, soil remediation, irrigation, multi-year care, professional monitoring, and in some cases locating matching genetic material from outside collections. The state did not announce a final penalty. It began calculating exposure. That was worse for Karen. Each number arrived separately: estimated soil restoration, professional arboricultural monitoring, propagation and grafting, replacement stewardship, administrative costs, damage to protected specimens, legal review, survey work, emergency site stabilization. The preliminary range moved beyond the amount Cedar Ridge had budgeted for the entire dog park. Then Marcus Bell found something that interested him even more than the trees. The HOA had paid unusually high prices to remove them. The dog park had been presented to residents as a $186,000 capital improvement. That number appeared in meeting slides, newsletters, and the special assessment notice mailed to homeowners. The signed construction package told a different story. Base site work, $119,000. Premium fencing, $61,500. Pet wash station and utilities, $38,400. Lighting, $27,800. Landscape removal, $42,000. Soil remediation, $36,500. Community consulting, $24,600 contingency, $48,000. The project was already above $397,000 before several change orders. Marcus placed the resident presentation beside the executed contract. The difference was too large to explain as ordinary inflation. He requested the board's approval records. 3 board members said they had voted on a summary budget, not the full contract. The treasurer, Linda Carver, looked physically ill when investigators showed her the line items. "I never saw this version," she said. Her digital approval appeared on it. Marcus asked whether she had signed electronically. "I approved the project budget. I did not approve $400,000. "Who had access to your board portal?" Linda looked toward the ceiling. Karen and management could route documents for signature. The state was not the proper agency to investigate every financial issue, so Marcus referred the accounting irregularities to the county prosecutor and the state office that oversaw nonprofit corporate filings. He kept the records relevant to the orchard. Those records led back to Shield Community Consulting. The company had been formed 14 months earlier. Its registered mailing address was a mailbox center. Its organizer was a man named Philip Whitmore, Karen's brother-in-law. Green Shield had received $24,600 under the dog park budget, including the $4,850 charge described as a certified tree survey. There was still no evidence Samuel Pierce had received $1. When Karen was asked about the connection, she did not deny it. "Philip consults for multiple communities," she said. "That doesn't make the contract improper." "What services did he perform?" "Project coordination." "Did he prepare the arborist report?" "No." "Who did?" "I've already told you. I don't know." "Then why did you email the treasurer saying Green Shield payment was needed so the hazard document could be completed?" Karen paused. "Because they were coordinating the vendors." "Which vendor?" "I don't remember." The board called an emergency meeting 2 nights later. For the first time in Karen's tenure, she did not control the room. Homeowners filled every chair and stood along the walls. Printed copies of the dog park budget circulated from hand to hand. Residents who had paid a $2,200 special assessment wanted to know why the public estimate had been less than half the contract amount. Karen tried to separate the issues. "The orchard dispute is being sensationalized," she said. "The dog park project remains a lawful community improvement." A man in the back called out, "On somebody else's land?" Karen ignored him. Linda Carver moved to suspend Karen's authority to approve vendor payments pending an audit. The motion passed 4-1. For perhaps 30 seconds, the room felt like an ending. Karen had lost control of the project. The machines were stopped. The state had the records. The board had turned on her. Then her attorney stood. He carried a thin blue folder. "Before anyone makes further defamatory statements," he said, "you should understand that Mr. Wakwasas himself released the orchard from the conservation program last year." Ethan, standing near the back wall, did not move. The attorney removed a document. At the top were the words, "Conservation Step Release" and "Ogre Acknowledgement." At the bottom was Ethan Walker's name, and above it was a signature that looked exactly like his. The room changed. Karen watched Ethan for a reaction. He gave her none. Marcus Bell received a copy the next morning. If the release was valid, it would not erase the property issue or the false arborist report. It would, however, complicate the state's conservation case. Karen's attorney argued that the HOA had been told the orchard no longer carried protected status and had reasonably relied on that information. Marcus asked the simplest question first. Where was this filed? The attorney said it had been provided by the property owner and retained in the HOA's project file. That wasn't my question. He asked for the state filing number. There was none. He asked for the date the Agricultural Heritage Office accepted the release. No one could provide it. He asked for the original. Karen's attorney produced a scanned PDF. Marcus sent it to Miriam Holt. She searched the active registry, archived registry, incoming correspondence database, property agreement records, and annual renewal file. No release existed. The orchard had remained active without interruption. Karen's explanation changed again. The HOA was given the document, she said. We had no reason to believe it wasn't filed. Who gave it to you? I don't remember. Email? Possibly. Mail? Possibly. In person? I said I don't remember. The document carried a notary seal from Melissa Grant, commission number 41872. Marcus checked the state notary registry. Melissa Grant had been a legitimate notary. Her commission had expired 18 months before the date on Ethan's supposed release. She had also moved to Arizona before the alleged signing. Marcus contacted her. She remembered Ethan's name only after he sent her an older property document. I notarized a boundary acknowledgement for Mr. Walker 3 years ago, she said, at First County Title. Did you notarize a conservation release last year? No. I wasn't even in the state. The signature became the next question. Ethan looked at the scanned release and felt something colder than anger. It was his signature, not a poor imitation. His. He went home and pulled the steel file box from the closet. Deeds, tax records, conservation papers, insurance surveys. He searched until he found the boundary acknowledgement Melissa Grant had notarized 3 years earlier. There it was. Same signature, same angle, same unusual break in the W of Walker. Ethan scanned both documents at high resolution and sent them to Marcus. A forensic document examiner overlaid the signatures. They matched perfectly. Real handwritten signatures do not repeat with pixel-level precision. The signature had been copied from the older document, but the older document contained something else. In the lower corner of Ethan's paper copy was a faint diagonal line from the title company scanner. It looked like a scratch. The same line appeared on the forged conservation release, just beyond the pasted signature. Whoever created the release had not copied Ethan's signature from a random public record. They had copied it from the exact scan stored in the HOA's property correspondence file. Ethan knew why that mattered. 2 years earlier, Karen had asked him for the boundary acknowledgement during a drainage dispute. Ethan had emailed the scan directly to the Cedar Ridge Management Office. Marcus subpoenaed the project mailbox. The original email was still there. Attachment: Walker Burial Acknowledgement.pf. Downloaded 6 times. The most recent download occurred 9 days before the fake conservation release was created. The user account belonged to Karen Whitmore. When Marcus showed her the access log, Karen stopped answering questions. Her attorney ended the interview. The counterattack had failed, but it had created a new problem for Karen far more serious than the one it was designed to solve. The investigation now contained 2 apparently fabricated documents: 1 copied professional signature, 1 copied property owner signature, a dead notary seal, questionable vendor payments, and a construction project launched on land the HOA did not own. That was when Cedar Ridge's insurer entered the picture. The carrier sent its own attorney and a forensic accountant. Insurance did not care about Karen's speeches, her popularity, or the board's politics. It cared about coverage. If the loss resulted from negligence, some claims might be insured. If it resulted from knowing trespass, intentional destruction, fraud, or document fabrication, exclusions could apply. The difference between those categories could leave Cedar Ridge exposed to enormous costs. Karen's influence over the board collapsed almost overnight, yet she still had one thing she could destroy: the physical evidence in the orchard. The temporary preservation order arrived late on a Thursday afternoon. It directed Cedar Ridge, its contractors, and all associated parties not to disturb the orchard while the state completed its assessment. The order specifically covered uprooted trunks, root systems, tagged material, soil around damaged trees, and equipment tracks relevant to the investigation. Marcus emailed it to Karen's attorney at 4:18. The HOA management company acknowledged receipt at 4:31. At 6:07 the next morning, Ethan heard diesel engines. He looked through the kitchen window and saw 2 dump trucks turning toward the orchard. This time there was no future dog park sign. There were no board members. Only a skid steer, a small excavator, and a crew Ethan recognized from the first clearing operation. He called Marcus before walking outside. "They're back. Are they on the protected area?" "Yes." "Do not confront them physically. Record from a safe location. I'm calling enforcement." Ethan took his phone and moved to the edge of his property overlooking the damaged rows. The crew was not building anything. They were cleaning. One worker looped a chain around an uprooted trunk. The skid steer dragged it toward a dump truck. Another operator pushed loose soil over the holes where roots had been exposed. A load of dark topsoil waited near the lane. Ethan zoomed in on the truck. 2 metal tags were still attached to branches in the pile. He called out from a distance. "There is a state preservation order on this site." Dale Mercer, the contractor supervisor, turned. "We were told cleanup was authorized." "By who?" Dale did not answer. Ethan kept recording. The excavator bucket lowered toward the largest exposed root ball. "Dale, that root system is evidence." Dale raised an arm and the operator stopped. For a moment, the only sound was the idling machines. Then Dale walked toward Ethan, holding his phone. "I got the instruction at 5:12 this morning. From Karen?" Dale's jaw tightened. "I'm not getting in the middle of that." "You're already in the middle of it." Dale looked back at his crew. He finally said, "She said inspectors had completed the tree count and wanted the debris removed before they came back." Ethan kept the camera steady. "Did you see the order? No, do you want to?" Dale did. Ethan texted him the PDF. Dale read the first page and immediately called his operators off the equipment. Karen arrived 8 minutes later in a dark SUV. She stepped out already speaking. "Why is nothing moving?" Dale held up his phone. Because there's a stop order. That doesn't apply to sanitation cleanup. It says root systems and tagged material. Karen looked toward Ethan and saw the camera. You are illegally recording a private contractor conversation. I'm standing on my property. This is harassment. Before Ethan could answer, 2 state vehicles entered the lane, followed by a county sheriff's unit. Marcus Bell stepped out with a printed copy of the order. He did not raise his voice. Shut down every engine. The operators complied. Marcus walked directly to the first dump truck and photographed the load before anyone touched it. Helen Shaw arrived 10 minutes later and examined the uprooted material. The result was devastatingly simple. Fresh cambium remained visible in multiple trunks. Several buds were viable. Root tissue from 2 specimens showed no decay consistent with long dead trees. Helen bagged samples, labeled them, and signed the evidence log. Karen had tried to remove what she called debris. Instead, the attempted cleanup preserved the clearest biological proof, yet that living registered trees had been removed. Dale gave a formal statement. He produced Karen's 5:12 a.m. text. Please clear all remaining orchard debris before inspectors return. We need the site presentable and construction ready. Marcus read it twice. Did she tell you the preservation order existed? No. Did she tell you inspectors were finished? Yes. They were not. Dale looked toward Karen's SUV. I know that now. The project was shut down completely. Not paused. Shut down. Within 48 hours, the state issued a formal notice of violations tied to the conservation agreement and evidence preservation order. The county prosecutor expanded its review of the document and payment issues. Cedar Ridge's insurer reserved its rights, meaning it had not yet agreed to cover all claims, and a hearing date was set. The hearing took place in a county administrative chamber that held fewer than 100 people. Every seat was filled. Karen sat with 2 attorneys. Ethan sat behind his counsel with Daniel's green ledger on the table in front of him. No one witness carried the case. That was the point. Helen Shaw testified first about dormancy. She explained that deciduous fruit trees naturally enter a period in which they lose leaves, reduce visible growth, and can appear lifeless to an untrained observer. She showed photographs from Laura Bennett's first inspection and the state examination. Green cambium. Viable buds, healthy graft unions. Then she showed samples from the uprooted trees. Were these trees dead when removed? The hearing officer asked. Not the specimens represented by these samples. The next witness was Miriam Holt. She walked through the Agricultural Heritage Registry and the Walker Property Agreement. The 47 recorded specimens had remained active in the program. No conservation release had ever been filed or approved. Karen's attorney argued that the HOA had relied on a release it believed was valid. Miriam was asked whether that document appeared anywhere in state records. No. Samuel Pierce testified by video. He confirmed his certification number. He confirmed the signature on the hazard assessment resembled his. Then he confirmed the document was not his. I never inspected that orchard. I never authorized removal of those trees. I was never hired by Cedar Ridge. The hearing officer asked whether he had received $4,850 for the survey. No. The forensic examiner followed. He showed how Pierce's signature had been lifted from an older public report. Then he displayed Ethan's genuine boundary document beside the supposed conservation release. The signatures aligned exactly. The scanner artifact aligned too. The state's digital analyst testified that Karen's downloaded the older document 9 days before the release file was created. Karen's attorney objected that access did not prove authorship. The hearing officer agreed. Access alone did not. Then Marcus introduced the email trail. Karen's request to release Green Shield payment because the hazard document needed to be completed before contractor mobilization. The project log showing the arborist PDF created from her board account. The vendor relationship to her brother-in-law. The absence of any contract with Samuel Pierce. The text message directing Dale to remove orchard debris before inspectors returned. The sequence mattered more than any single document. Linda Carver, the HOA treasurer, testified that the board had never been shown the full $397,000+ project package before the vote. 2 other board members said the same. Dale Mercer testified last among the project witnesses. Who instructed you to enter the Walker property? He was asked. Karen Whitmore. Who told you the HOA had legal authority? Karen in the project packet. Who told you to return for cleanup after the state became involved? Karen. Karen finally testified. Her attorneys had prepared her carefully. She said the project was intended to serve residents. She said she relied on consultants. She said winter photographs reasonably suggested the orchard was in decline. She said she believed the conservation release was legitimate. She said vendor selection had been delegated. She said the cleanup message was meant to make the site safe. The hearing officer let her finish. Then he asked one question. When Mr. Walker stood on his property and expressly told you he did not consent to removal, what did you do? Karen looked at her attorney. The attorney could not answer for her. I relied on the board authorization. That was not my question. Silence settled across the room. The officer repeated it. What did you do? Karen answered quietly. I told the contractor to continue. By then, the central issue no longer depended on whether Karen thought bare branches looked dead. The question was responsibility for each tree, for each document, for each payment, for each decision made after warning. The administrative ruling came first. The dog park authorization was voided. Cedar Ridge was ordered to cease all work on Ethan's property, restore the damaged fence and access areas, fund a professionally supervised orchard recovery plan, and reimburse specified state assessment costs. Additional penalties were assessed under the conservation agreement according to the condition and status of affected specimens. The civil settlement followed months later. It was large, but not because Ethan had convinced anyone that an old apple tree was made of gold. The total combined categories were large because damage accumulates. Soil remediation, root zone restoration, propagation, grafting, irrigation, professional monitoring, replacement stewardship, surveying, legal costs, property restoration, state penalties, administrative expenses, and the cost of reconstructing rare genetic lines that could not be replaced by buying ordinary trees at a garden center. The preliminary exposure crossed 7 figures when all parties' obligations were combined. Cedar Ridge's insurer agreed to cover portions tied to covered negligence but disputed intentional acts. That distinction forced the HOA to pursue contribution from vendors and individuals connected to the unauthorized work. Green Shield became the subject of a separate financial investigation. Payments unrelated to actual consulting services were recovered. The board terminated the company's relationship with Cedar Ridge. The management firm placed new controls on document access and payment approvals. Karen was removed as president before the next annual election. She resigned from the board 2 weeks later. The county investigation into the fabricated documents continued independently. Ethan did not build his life around predicting criminal charges. By then he understood something important. Justice did not have to arrive in one spectacular moment to be real. Sometimes it arrived as a stack of corrected records, sometimes as a refunded assessment, sometimes as an insurer refusing to hide intentional conduct inside a routine claim, sometimes as a contractor admitting who gave the order, and sometimes as a board finally learning that a vote could not create ownership over land it never possessed. The financial audit produced its own quieter series of reversals. Investigators reconstructed the dog park account from bank statements, board portals, vendor invoices, and email approvals. Several charges that had looked ordinary when viewed alone became harder to explain when placed beside one another. Green Shield had billed for coordination meetings that no board member remembered attending. A landscape subcontractor had invoiced Cedar Ridge for equipment standby on dates when no equipment had been on site. 2 change orders carried approval timestamps less than 10 minutes apart, even though they represented more than $60,000 in additional spending. Linda Carver sat through the audit interviews with a folder of her own records. She had been treasurer for 3 years, and the experience humiliated her. She had trusted the summaries placed in front of the board. She had assumed the management portal showed the same documents to every director. It did not. The system allowed the project administrator to attach supporting files after a vote request was created. That meant a director could approve a line labeled Dog Park Capital Package, while a later, larger contract appeared beneath the same digital approval history. The software itself had not forged a vote. Someone had used the workflow to create the appearance of broader approval than the board actually gave. The management company changed that process immediately. From then on, any alteration to a contract after board approval automatically voided the approval and required a new recorded vote. That change mattered to homeowners more than Karen expected. For months, she had described opposition as a personal feud between Ethan and the HOA. The audit made that explanation impossible. Retirees who had never met Ethan began asking why their assessments had funded a private consulting company connected to Karen's family. Young homeowners wanted to know why the association had spent money on legal review without confirming the boundary. People who supported the original dog park wanted the project investigated because they had supported a $186,000 amenity, not an open-ended construction account. At the next resident meeting, no one applauded Karen. She attended because she had not yet formally resigned. The board president's chair had already been given to Linda on an interim basis, so Karen sat at the side table with ordinary residents. For the first time, she had to listen while the new board read the numbers aloud. Recovered vendor payment, $18,750. Canceled fencing deposit, $21,000. Unused lighting order, $13,400. Insurance reimbursement reserved for covered site restoration. Legal expenses still under review. The amounts did not erase the damage. They showed residents that some money could be recovered only because the project had been stopped before every contract was fully paid. One homeowner stood and asked the question many had been avoiding. If Ethan hadn't come home while the machines were there, would we have ever known? No one on the board answered immediately. Linda finally said, "We know now because the work was challenged and the records were preserved." It was not a satisfying answer. It was an accurate one. The county prosecutor later announced that the document investigation had been referred for formal review of potential fraud, false instrument, and related offenses. The announcement did not promise convictions, and Ethan did not treat allegations as verdicts. His attorney reminded reporters that separate proceedings had different burdens of proof. That restraint irritated people who wanted a cleaner ending. Ethan did not care. He had spent months watching what happened when someone decided the conclusion first and looked for paperwork afterward. He was not going to repeat the same mistake simply because the target had changed. What he wanted was narrower, his land restored, the surviving trees protected, the false documents corrected, the people who paid for the dog park told where the money went, and the authority to enter his property made unmistakably clear. The final settlement recorded the boundary in language no future board could plausibly misunderstand. It confirmed that the drainage easement remained limited to its 12-foot corridor and granted Cedar Ridge no recreational, landscaping, construction, or nuisance abatement rights beyond it. Any future access outside that strip required Ethan's written permission or lawful government authority. A certified copy went to the HOA. Another went to the county property office. Ethan put his copy in the steel file box. On top of it, he placed the fake conservation release. He kept that copy too, not as a trophy, as a reminder. The most dangerous document in the entire dispute had looked completely ordinary. It had a title, a signature, a notary seal, and the right vocabulary. If Marcus Bell had treated appearance as proof, the investigation might have turned in a different direction. Instead, every claim had been forced to answer the same questions. Where was it filed? Who signed it? Who witnessed it? Who got paid? What system recorded it? What happened when those records were checked? That discipline had done more than expose Karen. It had separated mistakes from deliberate acts, legitimate expenses from questionable ones, and facts from the confident language wrapped around them. By the time the audit closed, Cedar Ridge had a new board, new approval controls, a published capital project policy, and a rule requiring independent title verification before any project touched land near a subdivision boundary. None of those reforms were exciting enough for a rendering at an annual meeting. They were far more valuable than a decorative dog park gate. Cedar Ridge homeowners received a full accounting of the dog park project. The promised $186,000 amenity had grown past $397,000 before completion. Several charges were reversed or recovered. Residents received credits against future assessments from recovered funds. The board adopted a rule requiring complete contracts, conflict disclosures, and recorded property verification before any capital project could begin. The dog park did not disappear forever. It moved. A year later, residents approved a smaller design on a parcel the HOA actually owned. The project had fewer decorative features, no expensive wash pavilion, and no emergency clearing invoice. Dogs did not seem to care. Ethan cared about something else. Spring. The first warm week arrived slowly. Helen Shaw and Laura Bennett had spent months building a recovery plan. Not every damaged tree could be saved. 2 of the uprooted specimens died despite attempts to stabilize surviving material. Another had suffered too much root loss. Some genetic lines, however, could be propagated from viable cyanwood collected before the tissue failed. Daniel's records helped again. His ledger identified which grafts had come from which parent stock. The state located matching material in 2 small preservation orchards and 1 university collection. Where possible, they regrafted lost varieties onto new rootstock and replanted them in the original row pattern. Ethan refused to make the restored orchard look new. He did not want symmetrical landscaping. He wanted continuity. The old trees that survived stayed exactly where they were. Freshly grafted replacements went into the gaps. The repaired fence followed the original line. The ground where the dog park sign had stood was seeded with clover and grass. Then in late March, tree 7 and row 4 broke bud. Ethan saw it at sunrise. Tiny green points pushed through branches the HOA report had once classified as dead. Within days, green spread across the orchard, not evenly, not perfectly, Some trees woke early, some late, just as Daniel had written. Leave it alone. It knows what it's doing. Ethan carried the ledger outside and sat on the tailgate of his truck. For months, the orchard had been evidence, survey points, case numbers, samples, invoices, photographs, exhibits. Now it was an orchard again. The state replaced the damaged registration tags, but Ethan asked to keep one of the bent originals after the evidence hold was released. He mounted it inside a simple wooden frame in the workshop. Hey 4719. No dramatic plaque, no speech, just the tag. Near the first row, he installed a small sign explaining that the orchard contained historic regional apple varieties, maintained through generations of grafting and conservation. Beneath it were the names Daniel had written in his ledger, and the approximate years each line entered the family orchard. Visitors occasionally stopped to read it. Some were Cedar Ridge residents. A few apologized even though they had never voted to enter Ethan's land. He never blamed them. Most had been shown winter photographs and told experts had declared the orchard dead. They had paid an assessment and assumed the people in charge had verified the rest. That, Ethan realized, was the lesson that lasted longer than the lawsuit. Authority often sounded most convincing when it used official language. Emergency authorization, certified assessment, community safety, owner acknowledgement, board approval. Every phrase sounded powerful. None of them could make a dormant tree dead. None could turn a drainage easement into ownership. None could make a copied signature genuine. None could erase the history inside Daniel's ledger. By April, blossoms opened across the surviving trees. White first, then pale pink at the edges. Ethan walked the rows one evening as sunlight fell through the branches. He stopped where the excavator had pulled the first tree from the ground. A young graft now stood there, tied loosely to a support stake. It would take years to become what had been lost. Some losses could not be fully repaired at all. That was why the final number had never been the real victory. The victory was that the orchard had not been reduced to a line item on somebody else's amenity plan. It still had a future. A garden can look dead in winter. A document can look official on a screen. A title can make someone look powerful. But appearances do not change ownership, truth, or the history beneath them. As evening settled over the Walker property, Ethan closed his father's ledger and looked down the rows. New leaves moved in the spring wind. The old trees had survived long enough to tell the truth for themselves. And when the first apples formed months later, Ethan left one branch untouched beside the repaired fence. His father had once said a tree proved itself quietly, season after season. Ethan understood. The orchard did not need revenge. It needed time, care, records, and people willing to recognize what was still alive.